Hello again YouTube, my name is Bree and in today's video I am doing part 2 of the How I Paint Skin. I want to reiterate that this is not meant to be a tutorial per se, but I had a lot of questions about how I painted skin and I wanted to walk you through that process. I don't want to tell you that this is how you should paint skin because I find that there are things I don't like about my own style, and I think it's important to find what works for you, and what I do might not be what works for you. So take from this what you can, but don't be afraid to do things completely differently because this is just how I work. Part 1 of the video goes through a lot more color theory, and like the basic skin mixes from a limited palette. I did share that palette at the very beginning of this video, but I'm just going to jump right in and kind of skip that part since I already covered it. But basically what I'm doing to start with is a bit of a gradient. I talked about color zones in the skin in my prior video, but basically I am going from a more yellowish skin tone for the forehead, a bit more of a red skin tone in the midsection of the face, which covers the ears, cheeks, nose, and lips, and then dropping down into currently a cooler red, but ultimately more towards a purplish tone at the bottom of the face, just to kind of hit those color zones I talked about in the prior video. Now, I'm using 2 brushes here, and one of those brushes is a synthetic mop brush. I use either that or my Princeton Neptune brushes. Those hold a lot of water and are really good for doing big washes and laying down color. And then this brush is the Princeton VelvetTouch, and it's a bit stiffer. It's still a watercolor brush, but it's more of a multimedia brush. And I use this one more for lifting color because I can scrub with it and not damage the bristles like I would with my mop brush, or smoothing colors. And sometimes even just because it'll dry out, I'll use it to actually remove a little paint, even not to lift, but just when I put too much water down. So I jump back and forth between those brushes, and that's essentially what I'm doing. So at this point, I'm mostly just sculpting the base layers. And I say sculpting because I kind of feel that's what I'm doing. I know a lot of people say that in terms of paint. I have no experience with actual sculpture, but I like to push and pull those initial tones. So I build that gradient, and then I start to go in and add the warmth where I want it. And because I find it easier to do just the bold washes, and I don't want, in most cases, the white of the paper showing through, because very few things are pure white in real life. I like to do lifting because it's just generally easier than trying to avoid certain spots and then blend into them, and it allows the paint to stain a little bit in those places. So where I'm lifting those highlights in the cheek and along the jaw, and then on the neck, and of course on the nose as well, it gives it a little bit of that skin tone, but then allows me to withdraw most of the pigment and most of the tone to start to kind of use this as an underpainting that I just build on. So for my style, and once again, this is my style, which this is where I am right now. I can't guarantee this is how I'll even be working a year from now, but this has kind of been what I've been doing for the past year or so. I work in lots of tiny little layers. I use really diluted paint, and I kind of build gradients everywhere. So like you could see on the neck right now, it goes from like a purple to a red, and then back to that really light color, and then back into that red, and everything I try to keep it pretty smooth. This is actually pretty easy with a brush like this one. Well, also because at this point, since it is cotton paper, it does take a while to dry, so everything is kind of a wet on wet and it blends into each other kind of naturally. But I'll also lay down the paint and then kind of drag it when the paper is dry. So here is a great example. I'm laying down the paint there, and then I'm taking the paint off the brush and then smoothing it out. dragging the paint and building that gradient just by adding the water and lifting some of the paint underneath it. So that's kind of the core of what I'm doing this whole time, is I'm just adding more and more layers of this diluted paint and letting it build up, instead of just putting down heavy, thick paint, or not really thick, but heavily pigmented paint down from the beginning. Instead, I'm just slowly building my way there. What I like about working in a lot of layers like this is, first of all, I can be pretty timid about the paint application. So with watercolor, you can always build up, but you can't easily subtract. So if you put down something like, say, a really dark, bold color, that is pretty much going to be in that final painting. If you build up slowly, you can always add more. I'm just really a timid painter, I guess. And that's one reason I don't necessarily recommend to other people to take this approach, because some people work a lot faster and a lot more effectively than I do. I'm slow. I am really slow at painting. But at the same time, I find this process pretty therapeutic. I just sit back and slowly build and watch things come together. And I really enjoy it. So it works for me on multiple levels. Now, I haven't mentioned the little value study I have. I don't always have a value study like this, and I know he doesn't actually look much like the thing I'm actually painting. But the goal was just to illustrate that that's kind of what I'm going for. It's easier for me to show value in basically every other media except watercolor. So with pencil, it's like very stark. This side of the face is dark, this side's light, let's move forward. But I tend to work in a higher key where I don't want to say I'm afraid of contrast, but I'm not the best at applying it well. And that goes back to my general timidness. I like to work with color temperature more than value, which I'd say is probably a weakness as well. So in this case, I'm building that left side of the face more towards a bluer color to make it look shadowed, rather than just putting down darker tones. So it is going to have some contrast in the end, and it is going to be, that side of the face will be darker than the other side, but it's more subtle and more based on color temperature than actual value. So once again, it's just how I tend to work at this point. And I know a lot of people are going to work much differently than me, but that's just kind of what I'm going for here. Whether it's effective or not, you can tell me later. So I definitely listed it at the beginning of video. I can't talk at the beginning of the video, but just to recap, I actually squeezed out the tubes so you can see the actual paint I'm working with and the paint I'm mixing with as I go, because in the last video they were in the big palette and I was kind of pulling them from under the desk, so I wanted you to be able to see what I was doing this time. The top color is Quinacridone Rose. These are all Daniel Smith. The bottom red is Pyrrol Red, so that's my warm red and cool red. And then the yellow is Yellow Ochre, and the blue is Ultramarine, or French Ultramarine, which is the granulating one. So you can already see some of that granulation coming through in the skin. Now, I don't mind having some subtle granulation because skin isn't perfectly, when I'm brushing at the thing, it's just cat fur has appeared. Skin isn't perfectly flat, so the texture of the paper and also just granulation in general, I don't mind having a little texture in the skin in my paintings because, at least I don't have perfectly smooth skin. I know some people, everyone in movies seems to, but not me. But if you want a blue that doesn't granulate, I generally use Indanthrone blue, which is darker, and actually a little less warm than Ultramarine, but it's still a warm blue. And I find that works pretty well with the techniques I like to use with the lifting as well. Now, Phthalo Blue, red shade, is also going to be another warm blue that's very flat, but it's also very pigmented, so it will tend to overpower a lot of your mixes. You'll want to use less of it than you would with the Ultramarine. Get a little water there. That's better, because the tinting strength is so much higher in the Phthalo Blue than it is in the other blues. My voice is just going to disappear again right away anyway. So the other thing about Phthalo Blue, and I did mention this before in the other video, it is very staining. So if you put down that paint and let it dry, it's not going to come back up. So a lot of the lifting techniques I'm using with the flat brush, it's not going to work with Phthalo Blue. Once it's there, it's there. I like to even re-wet the paint after it's kind of down, just to even smooth out some edges. That's not so much, excuse me, it isn't so much of an issue on cotton paper, because cotton paper, it just, I'm not prepared to talk about paper at all. It just lays down differently. With cellulose paper, when I work on cellulose, you get a lot more of those harder edges around the watercolor from the way the paint sits on top of the paper. So when I'm working on cellulose paper, I really do use the flat brush even more to blend out the edges. Here I can get smoother gradients on cotton paper with less effort, though I do still go back around the jaw and the edge of the face a lot to smooth it out. But here I'm lifting on the nose, I'm going over that and pulling that highlight, and some of that's even just to add more color to it, because I don't want the nose dots to be pure white. If I did, I'd probably go back with either white gouache or a gel pen to add that like shine afterwards, which I don't do on this one. I just find it easier for some reason to go over everything and then do the lifting. It provides a smoother edge on those light spots, the highlights, and I like that. So at this point, I'm noticing that I've used too many cool colors. I tend to use the Quinacridone Rose and the Ultramarine together to create my shadow color, but in doing so, I've kind of matched the lighter side of the face to the darker side of the face. So I want to bring in more warmth, which I just had perfect timing there because that's exactly what I just did. I was putting the Pyrrol Red back on that side of the face to warm it up, to give that illusion of more light. And then after that, I grab more of the yellow ochre, and all of those highlights I'm kind of going over with yellow ochre to give it a little bit more warmth as well. So yellow ochre is a warmer yellow, but any yellow is going to apply a bit of warmth, and then that Pyrrol Red is going to look a lot more warm than the Quinacridone Rose. So both of those are really good in this particular palette for warming up, whereas the Quinacridone Rose and the Ultramarine are going to cool everything down because they're both on the cooler side. Quinacridone Rose, while it is a red, the pigment's actually PV19, so it's actually a violet pigment. So at this point, it really does take me what feels like forever to really feel like I have the base tones down. I kind of like live in underpainting mode for a long time, and then at some point I just start fidgeting more, and I know I'm getting close to being done. I think sometime soon I probably put in a base layer for the hair, and the eyebrows definitely come first, just to have something to act as a point of comparison. At some point, one of the issues I had early on was I would always paint the skin first and then move on to the next thing. And I never understood why I could paint the skin and it looks great, and then I paint the hair or the clothes and suddenly realize how everything looks so pale and washed out. And it's just a matter of having that point of comparison. So if I were to paint the skin light, because it is a light skin character, and then go give him really dark brown hair or a black shirt, he's immediately going to look much lighter because instead of comparing him to the white background of the page, I'm now comparing him to his dark hair or his dark clothing. And so taking that time to even just put in some base layers of even a pale wash really helped me understand what type of comparisons I'm going to start looking at, and to go back in and add more to the skin to build that overall balance. So even though I tend to work light across the board, sometimes I'll just overdo it and make the hair really dark or the clothes really dark, and then immediately have to go back and revisit the skin kind of across the board. So even just putting in a bit of a wash really helps. I also find, in this case, I didn't erase the eyebrows, but sometimes when I'm working with the kneaded eraser, I take off too much. I think I actually drew them back in just for this particular painting. The face never looks right to me until they have eyebrows. Everything else they look very washed out without them. I don't know, because people could have pale eyebrows too. It's just something for me that seems off until I have the eyebrows in, I guess. But here, you can still see them in pencil, so it's not so bad. But especially when I'm doing like characters with lighter hair, I really struggle there. Now, one of the problems with filming is that I am at this is my filming setup. I'm at a very bad angle to my painting. And in this case, sometimes I'll tinker with it more off camera because I'll take a pause and then I can move the sketchbook or get in where the camera is, where I'd be blocking it otherwise, and get a better angle on it and make some corrections. In this case, I couldn't really do that because I wanted to film as much of the process as I could to show everything, all the mixing, all of the painting, all of the blending. So there's moments where things look really wonky and I keep going back. So I think in this case, I noodled with things more than I generally do. Like especially with the eyes, I go back and forth the eyes. Even at the very end, I'm trying to lift a little bit around the nose because I realized I could help it look a little less crooked by stripping off a tiny little bit of paint. So yeah, I know there's some little wonky bits, but it's okay. I made this video kind of slow. Normally I speed up the painting really quickly because, like I said, I work really slowly, but in this case I wanted to show as much as possible without the video being 2 hours long. So I keep forgetting how long it takes me to get to certain spots. So yeah, the initial eyebrows, I didn't really think it through when I first did this, and I made them far later than I meant to make the hair later, so I ended up going back and fixing that later. But this isn't a hair tutorial, or not a tutorial, just how I paint skin. So when I do get to the hair, I actually do speed up the video a bunch because I'm not where I want to be painting hair yet, and I don't want to talk about it too much. And I ran out of steam and just kind of didn't want to spend that much time on the hair this weekend, so that's all I got. I'm honestly really tired. Sorry. So yeah, with the skin at this point, already I could see the lips look way too warm. And the eyebrows and the eyes are starting to add a lot of color and a lot of contrast. I think, yeah, so this is where I go in and I start putting that base layer in the hair so I could kind of see everything together, and then go back and start noodling more with the skin to put everything in kind of balance. When working with a limited color palette like this, when it's this restrictive, basically no matter what you do, you're pretty much guaranteed to have some sort of color harmony. If you're working with a full palette like those massive 48 pan tins, you can definitely end up with things that compete with each other a lot more. In this case, everything's going to kind of work together in the end, and I can just play around without worrying about the colors as much and focus more on value and form. And like I said, value is even subjective because I tend to work more with color temperature than true traditional value. And that's something I'm starting to see more and more of, especially when I work with gouache, because using an opaque media, I tend to play more with the actual value rather than the color temperature because I'm really pushing myself to get better at that. But watercolor, I don't know, I just like working like this. Eventually, I'm sure I'll find a way to bring everything together and put it all together in some interesting way, but I'm not there yet. So yeah, now I've definitely added a lot more blue to the left side of the face. So yeah, it does have a different value, but it really, the color temperature difference is more substantial than the value difference. Like if this were a photo with that dramatic lighting like in that value study, that other side of the face is going to be far darker and in far more shadow than I'm making it out to be. So once again, it's just a stylistic choice, and it probably doesn't work for a lot of people, and that's fine. It's just how I like to work for now. I'm feeling like I'm repeating myself a lot. Oh well. So I think at this point, I'm on the next day. I can tell because it got cold all of a sudden, so I'm wearing my hoodie and probably tracking more cat fur onto my painting. This sketchbook, it's the Etchr, I think Everyday Sketchbook is what they're calling it. And it's the one with the white cover. Something about their paper is like a magnet for cat fur more than any other sketchbook I have. If the cat walks by, there's going to be fur on it. It just loves to float up there. And at this point, I think this is where it's really starting to get noticeable. Not so much in the painting itself, but the sketchbook page is starting to warp. I don't know why I didn't clip this page down to help with that a little bit, but if it's bouncing a lot more, that's my mistake. I don't think I was emotionally ready to talk this long today. So, yeah, at this point, it's just a lot of the same. I really don't know what to say about it. I just very slowly building up layer upon layer upon layer. In watercolor, this is sometimes referred to as glazing, or often it's glazing. It's taking thin, lighter washes and applying them over the top. Often you'll see people do this more as just to give things a different tint, but I pretty much work exclusively in glazing. I think I've heard the watercolor states it's referred to as, I'm going to forget. Oh, I don't remember the words now, but basically the less water you have, the thicker the paint is. And I'm going to feel stupid later, but it's like the last stage is, it's not like wash, but it's that denser layer. I've seen it referred to in dairy products, and yeah, I can't remember now. Is it cream? No, I'm not gonna. This is a waste of time, this part of this voiceover. But yeah, I never really get there, and it's something I want to work on. I want to try using a higher impact style of watercolor where I can put down those more significant washes that have a more substantial impact on the final piece. So instead of building up each of these tiny, tiny layers over and over again, just going in there and putting in a nice bold shadow and committing to it, and that being part of the final piece. I'd love to be able to do that. I just haven't gotten comfortable with that style of painting yet. So definitely, if that works for you, go for it. Once again, I feel weird doing this particular topic just because I don't feel I'm doing things in a way where I should be telling people how to paint. So it just feels weird to me. And at this point, the face is getting close to being done in and by done, I mean to a point where I'm comfortable at. Working with these thin layers, you can definitely keep kind of going on and on and on forever, especially building up value. But I kind of get to a point where I'm just ready to move on. I don't have anything that's like a clear indicator or flashing light that says, okay, I'm done with the skin. It's time to do something else. I kind of just get to a point where I'm not really sure what I should do next. And that's when I really move on. Then like in this case, I only have the hair. There's not much else in this painting. So I'll go to the hair, fill that in. And once I'm done there, I'll make those final adjustments in terms of the darker shadows or warming things up. And yep, there it is. So at this point, I speed up the video. I think it was at 5x before, and I go to 15x here, I think. Just because, yeah, I'm not ready to talk about hair because I'm not happy with how I paint hair. I want to work on it. I definitely have plans to work on it. I just haven't. There's been a lot going on. I haven't had the time to focus on anything in particular. I've had actually, I don't want to say art block because it doesn't feel like art block, but I've just been so low energy of late that I'm struggling to find the motivation and the time to work on painting. It's just it's a really busy time at work. And even though I'm not working an extraordinary number of hours, it's not like I'm doing 60-hour weeks or anything, but I'm so much more drained when I'm finished with work that I'm finding it harder to create art in the evenings or even start on things or think through projects. And then by the weekend, it's not just art I want to catch up on, it's chores and errands and even just, being a lazy bum and sitting down. And I don't know, I've been watching more TV. I usually don't watch a lot of TV, and I've been watching a lot more television lately. So I'm hoping things kind of balance out soon. I guess I'm still in speed up mode, but I'm doing more on the skin without... Oops, I probably won't go back and fix that if I'm completely honest. So you can probably hear it in my voice even going in and out. I'm not sick, I'm just tired. And hopefully everything will be fine soon. The next 2 weekends I will be working. So I don't know if I'll have another video in 2 weeks like I normally would. I might just take the extra week off to focus on that and then hopefully take some time off from work and recover and start on some other projects. So I mentioned before that I took that clarity workshop and still really not sure what to say about that as a whole, but I did come up with an idea of something I'd like to work on. Basically, if you've been here a while, you know that I'm always working in sketchbooks, and that's not just on YouTube, that's in general. I live in sketchbooks, and I'd like to take the time to actually paint some bigger and more detailed pieces and do that on just loose sheets of paper and really push myself to spend extra time thinking through what I want to create and working on something that I'm really hopefully proud of. So that's something I don't expect to be on YouTube because taking that extra time, it feels like I need to be not focused on filming or what it's going to look like in the long run. I just need to focus on the piece itself. But it's a project I haven't been able to start yet because I can't mentally engage with it. So we'll see where I end up next. I had a list of future videos and I don't even know where it is right now. I need some time off to think and relax and even play some Horizon Forbidden West because I have not played as much of that as I'd like since it came out. So I don't really think I have anything else left to say on this topic. If there's anything you're curious about or need more information on, let me know. I'll try to respond in the comments or maybe address it in a future video at this point. I just wanted to give him some freckles. I was thinking about other things I usually work with in skin, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to give him like a scar or freckles or what, and I just went with freckles because, I don't know, he looks sad enough. He doesn't need to be all beat up. But yeah, so for freckles, typically I just make kind of a reddish brown and dot them on, and then I lift up some of the paint just to help them blend in where I want them to blend in more. If someone had a lot of freckles, I would probably do some splatter technique just to really get them everywhere. But in this case, I just kind of wanted a couple moles and some light freckles. So yeah, just did it with the brush. And then I'm just adding some little shadows that I forgot, like where the hair is over the face. And then some final touches, adding those last little bits of blue under the eyes to make him look a little more tired, and then adding a bit more warmth. And this I'm just doing wet on wet at this point because I just want the paint to flow out more naturally. So I wet the cheeks and let it dry for a second, and then go back in with just the Pyrrol Red and let it disperse a bit more naturally to warm up the cheeks a bit more. I actually overdid a little bit, and I think after I finished filming I cleaned up a little bit of the border there. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you again sometime next month. Take care of yourselves. Bye.